In this realistic fur watercolour tutorial, I'm going to share with you some of my top tips for painting fur. There's of course masses of techniques which we can look at. So I've chosen a few from this painting of a lion, which I think will help you with painting your own realistic fur in watercolour. Here's my first tip, and it relates to the foundation wash that you choose for your animal. In this case, an African lion I'm working on. Now when I start working on foundation washes, which is a basic layer that I add before I start adding the details over the top, you've got to think about the colours, because these are all those underlying colours behind that fur, which is basically what I'm working on here, just to make sure I've got some of the colours in the background ready to add the details over the top of. I'm kind of switching between two mixes here while I'm working on it as well. Two sort of brownie mixes. Move that around there, move that around there. And you find that, see, when you're looking on something like the lion, the more you look at the photograph, the more you want to see. So you've got to really pinch into that photograph and look at the details, which is another reason why I tend to use a large photo. So when you're working on the foundation washes, you need to see where them colours go. Just bear that in mind when you're working on a furry or even feathery subject. Mind you, even scaly to a certain degree. I know. And I know that once these are nice and dry, I can add a second layer of kind of washes over the top, but a little bit more fine-tuned. I can really kind of section off different areas in as well. Instead of working on all of it in one go, I start working on individual sections and start building them up with the washes of colour. Those two at the moment that I've got. And maybe having some kind of grey brown in there as well, we'll see. Let's look at that next, shall we? So as I mentioned with the foundation washes, is that you need to build them up. Just gradually build them up. Don't need too many layers, maybe a couple should be enough. It's all about looking carefully at what you can see there. Look at that reference photograph. And see what differences you can see within the colours as you look around each individual section. I mean, now what I'm doing, I'm actually working on this left-hand side, as you know, instead of working on the whole face in one go. Then whilst this is drying, I can start working on the other areas as well, can't I? Just by re-wetting certain areas, even though the paper's still slightly damp. Don't worry about cauliflower marks or blemishes as you do so. Doesn't matter. Not at this stage. So I've wetted that area there. I'm going to go into my grey colour, my Payne's Grey and the Burnt Umber. Then add that one into this side now. And that dullens that colour down again. Now one thing you've got to be careful of is not to go too colourful. Try to maintain the lightness of the paper in places if you can. So yeah, don't overdo it with the colours. Try to look for those lightest areas and to maintain those light areas. Because it's those light areas that will show the light through when we add those details over the top. Just gradually building up as we go along. Well, there you go, that's all the washes on. Yay! That means that we can get straight to the detail stage now, which I'm really looking forward to. Let's take a look at some tips for working on those details next, shall we? Now when you're working on small details like on this lion, you've really got to look carefully at that reference photograph. You've got to think about the direction of the lines, the length of the lines, the curvature of the line, and also the fullness of the area as well. I mean, are there more marks in one area than another? And what I mean by that is that when you start to increase the amount of lines in one area, this is my size 00 brush by the way, then by increasing those marks, we'll increase the density as well of that colour. So you can make it thicker, you can make it darker. Because we all know that obviously the more layers that you put on, the darker the colour will be, or even the richer the colour will be as well. So I find that when I'm working on something like this. So basically what you need to do is get the first layer on, thinking about what colours you're using as well. I've got quite an array of colours here as you can see. And think about where those colours go as well, because you've got to think this area here is more of that sort of kind of orangey browny, kind of rosy, yellowy, raw umbery colour around this area. And that's basically what I'm sort of using really at the moment. This is called the ugly stage. by my members. I know, it's not very polite, is it? But they call it that on my website because of the fact that this is before we start getting the contrasting colours on. When we go in there with the darker colours, then we get the shape. Then it starts to come alive. Well, not literally. I don't want that. I'm just filling the mouth in a minute. I've actually got my photograph zoomed in quite a lot at the moment, so I can really see where the details go and the directions. Sometimes it's good to zoom into the photo, and sometimes it's good to have it the same size as your painting, really, so you can actually see what it should look like. I like to zoom in so I can look at the angles or the directions of the lines more than anything. I can see the gentle curve coming along here. So I can't just draw a curved line because then it could be too straight. Well, you know what I mean. There won't be any jagged bits like this. But this is a really good way, I find anyway, of gradually building up a painting. So working down the mouth as I was saying about, do get sidetracked, I'm sorry about that. Thinking about where, a bit of a smile here, look. Smile for the camera, I know. And then pop that in. I'm basically just filling in the gap. So what you can do is, down the bottom you can nearly draw a line, not far off. And then while it's wet, just bring a few odd little marks away from that in the same direction the lines are going for the hairs. Just to break it up. When I work on all the fur as well, around the side of the head, I'm going to use a different technique for that. I'm going to use my replicator brush. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll show you that in a bit when I start using it. Okay, I'll kind of skip to that point within this video so I can show you what I've shown my members. And I think we'll look at that technique now. A few more little details around there for this first layer of detail. Now I'm going to show you my replicator brush, and all it simply is that. Yes, I know it looks a bit of a state. I know. But it works really, really well. And all it is an old broken brush. Look at that, look. That's it broken, which I was about to kind of throw into the bin. So it's always worth saving your old brushes. Don't throw them away. And what I've done, I've got a pair of pliers and crimped that metal ferrule. Completely destroyed that ferrule, as you can see there. And by doing so, it's kind of sprayed out those bristles. Yes, you can use a fan brush as well, but this is my little way of doing it by using just a standard round brush. Something like that one there. That's a size 2. This is a size 6, so a little bit smaller. So I'm going to lower the brush up, like so. I'm going to get some scrap watercolour paper with half a robin on it. Hello, Robin. If you don't take much of that paint off, you'll end up with quite dark lines, quite thick lines as well. But you can see that when you work with this, you're actually working with 2 lines in one go. See that? So working with 2 lines. And it depends, actually. They all vary when you make them. You might have 3 lines, 4 lines. All varies. And this is a synthetic bristled brush as well. And you can see the effects that you get through using this. See what I mean? And that's what I'm working with for this line at the moment. Just adding a few extra details here and there. Changing the colour while I'm working on this as well. Make it richer or duller in places. Depends on where I'm working really as well. Oh, and this is also a video which I'm making for my members on my website as well. Just out of interest, if you fancy painting a lion, in detail of course using our watercolours. But this is what I would use my replicator brush for, but I wouldn't use it for every single layer on this lion or any painting that I use. Because my layers tend to vary, how many layers I use. If I'm using, say, I don't know, 3 layers, I use this for probably the first 1 or 2 layers. And then I'll use my size 00 brush. And the reason behind that is because a replicator brush like this one can look a little bit too false. Show you what I mean. Look, if I can take some of that paint off there, look, is that the lines, because they're too parallel with one another, can make it look like this lion's been combed. It's been to the barber's. Hello. Hope it's been charged well for all that hair. But because of that, it's too parallel. So that's why I would then use my size 00 brush, this one here, look, just to kind of finish it off and get those finer details on. I'd like to share some tips for working with a size 00 next. Okay, back to my size 00 just for now. I'm going to start to work on the top of the head. Now I have to push that out of the way, so I'm going to move my left hand around this side now a little bit more. And what you need to do is flick out some lines into the background. And you find that some of these lines are very fine, very, very fine lines, so don't overload that brush. But some of these lines are very wiggly as well. So what you're looking at, was my robbing gun, there you go, is a wiggly line like that, but very fine though. Take some of that paint off, Paul. Too much. There you go, something like that, so very, very wiggly. Not all of them, but some of them are. It's had a bit of a bad hair day, hasn't it? It really has. So I'm using my Payne's Grey and the Burnt Umber, of course, to a milky consistency. That's all it is. You will find if you leave it in your wells too long, it'll start to thicken down. Then you'll need to add a little bit of water, kind of loosen up a little bit, otherwise it's going to be too thick and too dark at this stage. People do ask me as well, why don't you just go dark, Paul? Just go dark, just do it. That's because I like to have the layers in there. You know, when you've got layers behind all this lovely detail, then you know them layers are going to make it look deep and thick for the fur. So that's why I tend to make sure I've got at least 3 layers of detail on there. Sometimes more. It all depends on the subject I'm painting, to be honest with you. Now it's a new day, and all I'm doing at the moment, just readjusting some of these areas. Just applying a little bit more colour in places, a little bit more dark in places. Because I've come back and it's a new day, I can see all the changes that I need to make. So it's really good to kind of see it with fresh eyes every single time. I've noticed, for example, the side of the head here needs to dip in a fraction just about there. So you've got the eyebrow going over there, and then it kind of dips in a fraction and then carries on up at the top of the head there. So there's all these areas that I keep spotting, or spotted straight away, and I thought, oh, I must change those. And you find that as well. When you take them breaks, as I keep going on about, then you will see things and think, oh yeah, that needs adjusting, that needs changing. You notice when I load my brush up as well, sometimes I just put the tip in like that, so I just mentioned, or give it a little bit of a scrub like that with a tip. That just puts that little bit more paint on the tip of the brush. Small amount. I know it means you've got to keep reloading that brush because you're not putting much paint on it. At least that way around, I'm not going to put too much paint on the paper in one go. Very lightly touching all the time. So that's basically what you've got to do at this level, really. Go around the face, don't darken it too much. Remember, we've already got lots of detail underneath this. And the last thing you want to do is cover all that detail up with dark. Alright, so we do need to add the contrast on there, which is what this dark is all about. Get the nice contrasting colours to give it more of a three-dimensional feel. The white will finish that off as well. But at this level, remember, you don't need to add quite as much paint or quite as many details as you already have done for the first, well, the other layers that we've already applied. So let's do the white paints next. Yeah. Now sometimes, you know, when you're working on a very thin line, what I tend to do, I make my brush into a chisel. So I lightly tap it, don't really crush it, but lightly tap it like that and pull away. And instead of having a point like that, it's now a flat. See that? And what you can do with that, before it dries on the brush, is add some very fine lines using the flat. Always be careful with white and just add less than you think you'll need. Get the idea? But you know what I mean, so don't go too mad with it. It's very easy to get carried away when using watercolour white. The problem is when you start adding too much of this stuff, then you find that whatever you're painting, in this case it's lion, will start to look very aged. It will look very old. Really well. So be very careful of that. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about my favourite size 00 brush, I'll pop a link to the video that I think you'll like to the top right. Now I hope you found these tips and techniques helpful. Please leave a comment down below if you're going to use any of them in your own paintings. It's always nice to know when someone enjoys one of my YouTube videos.